has gone on here. Just as an introduction, I want to say a few things. This is a very challenging program for me because I'm a public historian. I'm not a prophet. I'm not a policy wonk. And so to go back to 25 years, there's still a lot of things that we don't know, that the forces haven't come together entirely. We haven't had time to really look back and assess what happened with a number of events. And so that's a challenge today. And really, the first decade of this century, 2001 to 2010, we can get a better sense of that, but it was, in my opinion, a lot of good things happening here in the Mahoning Valley and in the cities and townships and villages here. But it's still going to be a challenge. And a bigger challenge is sitting here with a room full of people who I would say the vast majority of you have lived in the Mahoning Valley for the past 25 years in real time. So it's, for most of us, very much in our minds in terms of what we experienced, what we saw, what we read about, what we discussed with friends and family and coworkers. So there's a challenge. I'm going to make one disclaimer, and I'm going to do everything I can to deal with issues without too much bias, because there's no such thing as an unbiased presentation, whether it be obviously not a political speech, but any historian brings bias to the table, any journalist brings bias to the table. All of us bring bias to the table, but I want to stick to some of the things that we see here that we're going to be talking about today. Another disclaimer is this is not a comprehensive study of the last 25 years, because A, honestly, I didn't have time to do that, and B, you don't have time to sit here and listen to it. So I've got some highlights. You'll notice some things that are missing. If when I finish and we want to have a discussion about other issues, we can certainly do that in terms of how it relates to our community's recent history and where we're going in the future. But that's where we want to be. And just to give you an idea of topics I'm looking to cover, I'll go in order here. I want to talk about local politics, local demographics, our local economy, economic development initiatives, in particular the downtown Youngstown Renaissance. I want to talk about something that happened 5 years ago. There's a surprise on that, and then we'll bring it all to a conclusion. Okay? All right, here we go. You're going to love this first image. We're going to talk about politics in the Mahoning Valley, especially in the early part of this century. We got to talk about this guy. I often find that people have a lot of photographs, be they portraits or in action or not. I always find a couple that are my absolute favorites. As far as James A. Traffic Jr. is concerned, this is one of my favorites. And if you recognize the setting, this was during his expulsion hearing from the House of Representatives in August of 2002, after he was convicted on multiple counts in federal court. And I think we know the story. There's a lot of buckshot, there's a lot of opinion around that, but I want to focus on that period because it really started almost in line with the new century. It was early January of 2001. The new House came together. One of the first things the House of Representatives does is vote on the Speaker of the House. his political cover in the process because there were ongoing investigations with him, but I think things really accelerated at that point to where the following year, the U.S. attorney in Cleveland was ready to go to court on multiple charges for which he was indicted. This photograph speaks to him as, let's just say, a populist politician and a person who had to have some degree, a great degree of courage to carry on his business the way that he did. And at this point, close to being thrown out of Congress, he was still defiant, he was still himself. And that very much speaks in this photograph. Now, we are far enough removed from his political career and his very tragic, untimely death more than a decade ago that we can put him into a larger context. And I'm going to put a little bit of opinion in here, but he is a very important political figure in terms of understanding our community in the late 20th century and early 21st century, but also what he did accomplish in his terms in the U.S. House of Representatives and also the legacy. There is a traffic legacy, and I'm not going to go over all that right now, but I'm going to point out some of that as we go along with this presentation. So, as far as populist politics or politicians go, he was up there among obviously the most well-known of his time. He appealed especially to working class, underprivileged people in his home community, his constituents, and throughout the country, and in some cases he got involved with world events, and always let you know exactly how he felt about issues as they came up. And because of that, because of his absolute sincerity, which comes out of his working class origins, the fact that he and his staff really cared about their constituents and did a lot to help people on an individual basis, but also to help through congressional legislation and earmarks our communities here in the Mahoning Valley. Like him or not, that is true. He was a very consequential political figure. Obviously much different from, say, Michael J. Kerwin of the 20th century, who worked for over 30 years within the structure of Congress and rose in power and did amazing things. Harry Michelle, I think, did the same thing in the Ohio State House, in the Senate, right, as the Senate President. Travigan's successor, Tim Ryan, I think, through his term, did the same. He played by the rules. He worked within his caucus. He did a lot of things that we do, but this guy just did it with a magnetism and an energy that's hard to replicate. So I'll leave it at that for now. Some other things happened on the political front that maybe aren't quite as obvious as the human traffickings, but one I wanted to point out that happened early in the 21st century was a lot of new leadership coming into county, municipal, village governments here in the Mahoning Valley. In particular, we, for the first time in 3 different communities, elected African Americans as mayor. You can see on the left there Jay Williams, who previously served as the community development director and ran for mayor and succeeded in 2005. Next to him is Glenn Holmes, who served on council and then as mayor of the village of McDonald, starting in 2008. And finally, you have Doug Franklin, who went to his first term as mayor of the city of Warren in 2011 and continues in that role. So that is significant really benefited from economic changes and the boom that we had starting in the 80s through the 90s and starting again in this century. And you can probably see to the left there an image that's very common. And this is something I noticed in the national news media. A lot of stories about Youngstown and the Mahoning Valley will start out with an abandoned industrial site, or file photos of blast furnaces blowing up and falling to the ground. And then whatever the topic is that day, it goes on. And but I want to suggest in here that is that who we are, or in many ways have we become a political and public policy bellwether? And I'll suggest that interpretation based on my own experience. We probably all remember the Youngstown 2010 initiative early in the century, and as I mentioned, Jay Williams, that was part of his legacy, first as community development director, but then as mayor, to push that through. And it was really groundbreaking stuff, and a lot of policy people and economic people, as part of economic journalism, took notice and wrote a lot about the 2010 initiative. And there was success there in terms of redefining us as a community, creating identifiable places within the city of Youngstown. We didn't get everything done. There were some things that just cost too much, or the political capital wasn't there to do what needed to be done. And in terms of, and the uniqueness was embracing the fact that we're a shrinking city, and the population is going down. There's no reason that we know of that it's going to go up anytime in the near future. How do we allocate resources? How do we address that? How do we rebuild a sense of pride and a sense of place for people who live here and also come in and work here? So that is some heady stuff that's happening, that we're actually at that point embracing a future without a major industry with a much smaller population. And I think many would agree that was commendable. Something else that I've experienced, especially 2012, 2016, not so much 2020 obviously, but 2024 is when we're getting into national elections, especially presidential elections, a lot of news outlets want to know what people in the Mahoning Valley think about what's going on. And I saw that in all those election cycles. In fact, I even participated in a couple of interviews. And we're talking about statewide, we're talking about national news media, but also international. Two interviews that I remember doing with the BBC and Al Jazeera. Imagine that. What does Al Jazeera care about the presidential election? Well, obviously a lot. And so people were paying attention to us. And of course, political populism over the past decade has really taken hold on a national level. And whether or not the party that promotes that is in power, and it's very much a force to be reckoned with. And again, we're talking legacy of crafting this community. I firmly believe that his style of populism, in terms of embracing the working class youth demographics. I think this is a very important issue, and obviously there have been continuous population declines, both in cities and villages and townships. In some cases, some have actually gone up. Counties, Mahoning, Trumbull, County are all losing population. The numbers speak for themselves in terms of the city of Youngstown. As an example, in 2026 people living in the city or who were counted in the census. In 2020, the city had 60,058 people. In the city of Warren, 2000 was 46,832 population. In 2020, it was 39,201. And that puts a strain on any community as far as maintaining a tax base, maintaining a housing stock, maintaining infrastructure. And so the continuing challenge we have, along with that, though it was much bigger in the 1980s and 1990s, continuing decentralization and growth, we call it sprawl, in suburban and even rural areas of our region, in terms of population moving away from urban centers and looking for a better life elsewhere, but still being very much connected to our community. And something else of note with demographics, and Youngstown is the first city in our region to do this. In 2010, that census, Youngstown's population became a plurality, meaning there was no single majority, or if you want to go that route, there was a majority-minority population, combined African Americans and Hispanics in particular, but all others. The white population in Youngstown is less than 50%, and that's significant. It's happening in a lot of other cities. As I mentioned, not much here, but if you look at trends, like with the city of Warren, it's possible the city of Warren might be a plurality population in 2030. We'll just have to see what happens. Now, as far as politics are concerned, we're pretty much done for today, or at least we get to the discussion phase. The economy. It's been a challenge for generations, going back really the 1960s to really intensified 1970s, 1980s. And I want to look at a few sectors of our local economy in terms of a lot of bad things, but also some good things happening. So let's despite the best efforts and investment in infrastructure, General Motors announced in early 2019 that they were pulling out, maybe even 2018, of their Lordstown operations and shutting it down. So then, in the aftermath of that, here you can see the Lordstown complex sign is actually on one of the side exits of the plant. But then out front, it was announced that Lordstown Motors was buying this enormous plant, and that happened in the midst of the pandemic. And they lasted till about 2023. They tried to bring electric trucks into the market, which didn't work out very well. And eventually they had to cease operations, and then they sold to Foxconn, who had plans of their own, plus lease parts of the plant. And though Foxconn is still an entity out at Lordstown, they recently sold the old assembly plants within the last month or so. So that's, again, a lot of uncertainty there. We don't know the whole story. I will point out the three photographs you see there, the Lordstown Motors and the Foxconn sign. Those are final signs that were wrapped around the old GM sign. Kind of poetic, ironic, but there it is. They weren't working out the way we had hoped. Now, another big part, even into the early 21st century, of our economy was still steelmaking. We had one remaining fully integrated plant, the old Warren Trumbull Steel plant, became Republic Steel Warren Works, later WCI Steel, which you can see there. And this runs up against another major phenomenon economically around the world, and the United States was here, and that was the Great Recession that started really early in 2008, but we all knew we were in trouble by September of 2008, and a lot of unemployment happened, a lot of retrenchment, and WCI Steel, as you can see, you can call it casually at that. They had already filed for bankruptcy in 2003. Then, in the midst of this recession, WCI Steel sold the plant to Severstal, who continued to operate it. But then by 2011, they sold to RG Steel, and it was in the aftermath of that sale that the plant closed, and then over a period of years was completely dismantled, taken down, and scrapped. All that remains of the Warren Works, of course, is the coke plant, which I don't remember which company runs that, but Cleveland Bliss. Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. So we have a casualty there, but then in the midst of this economic disaster, we had some good news for our steelmaking in the Mahoning Valley, and that happened at Valorec. And it's a direct connection to the shale boom that was happening throughout this region. The Marcellus Shale was oil was in the shale, and they were starting to figure out how to pump it out of the ground. And so, in the midst of all that speculation and drilling and production of the shale oils, Valorec, with the help of federal government and other sources, invested in a brand new state-of-the-art seamless pipe mill, which if you look at this image down in the bottom corner there, you can see that is the mill which straddles the Youngstown-Girard border. And they're still producing a lot of seamless pipe out of that mill. And then the other photo you see there, which is the front end of the plant along the 711 connector, that will be the hot operations or the basic operations where you have an electric furnace melting scrap and adding alloys to make new steel, and then a continuous caster to roll out the semi-finished rounds for making seamless pipe. So we actually did okay there as a success story in the middle of that economic upheaval. There's other things to talk about, and I think it's important, though it's illustrated for today, and it's happening the next block up here on Mahoning Avenue, and that is additive manufacturing. And I'm talking about Flying Eye and American Makes. We have one of the best research and development facilities in the country right now as far as how to improve upon and then make financially viable the whole process of additive manufacturing. Another term for it is three-dimensional printing. So we're not talking about plastic keychains there. We're talking about actual metallic compound products that, rather than being formed and cut down and stamped and refined, are just made on a table using a computer blueprint and as I mentioned, powderized amalgams of compounds to create metal material. So that is really exciting. Again, it's another topic in and of itself for discussion here in our Right to This program. Now, one of the very interesting things for me, but also for this organization, and a lot of people who live and work in downtown Youngstown, is the renaissance that occurred throughout the first 2 decades of the 21st century. And in the upper left corner there, you can see one of the main catalysts for that, which is now called the Covelli Center. And this brings us back to the legacies of Jim Trafficant. As he was being thrown out of the Democratic caucus, and because of his vote for Dennis Astor, he was able to obtain a large federal earmark and also grants, loans, to build that center, which is now called Covelli Center. And it literally is that catalyst, because if there's an event there, you want to come down and see it for yourself. If you haven't been there regularly, there is a line of cars coming from all directions throughout this region to participate in events at the Covelli Center. And that has spurred a lot of other developments in downtown Youngstown as far as having a meal or a drink before or after you go to the show at Covelli, or the hockey game, or any other sporting event that happens there. And so I think that renaissance, they work together, and then at the bottom right we have an image that I think really defines the ideal of where we were going, or where we are going with downtown Youngstown. There you see the Stambaugh building, as it was called, it was an office building. This is now a high-end hotel, part of the Hilton chain. Doubletree, thank you, yes. And you can see the lights, everything is looking gleaming there. And as far as the downtown renaissance is concerned, there was a lot of public investment directly in improving infrastructure downtown because it was necessary. Unfortunately, a lot of that has happened in the last 5 years with the roads, and we've heard some complaints about that. I've even taken a couple of jabs in my previous presentations, but but these things have to happen if we want to improve upon it. Something else that was important for the real estate developers in downtown Youngstown was finally getting a hold of using tax credits, those new market and historic preservation tax credits, to fund redevelopment of these historic structures in downtown Youngstown that are so important to understanding the look and the aesthetics of downtown, but actually making them work for the developers, make money, and provide housing, business opportunities, etc. in downtown Youngstown. So, and there was a very aggressive amount of development, especially starting in the late 2000s and the 20 teens as well. And we had some great projects, such as Doubletree, such as the old adding to that downtown renaissance are arts and cultural organizations. If you would ask me or any board members of the Mahoning Valley Historical Society if we were willing to invest millions of dollars in downtown Youngstown, say in 2000, 2001, no. And then a decade later, here we are. We were most fortunate to be able to acquire this building. So much of the original is still intact. As far as the original floor plan, it really dictated how we use the building today. And it's a great example of how urban redevelopment happens, how urban renaissance happens, and we're very pleased to be part of it here at Tyler History Center, but so pleased that we're going to do it again on the east end of town at 250 Federal Street. But aside from us, look at what happened at the Dior Center, with the Youngstown Symphony, the investments in the Stamp Auditorium, the continued expansion of the Butler Institute of American Art, even facilities at Youngstown State University. Oh wow, Center for Children's Center for Science and Industry, named for Robert Gloria Jones. These are all great examples of things that happened in this century that make downtown both unique but also desirable, and we need to reestablish that momentum. We've had some setbacks, and everybody recognizes that. How can something so microscopic completely turn over our community, our country, in many parts of the world? But it happened, and we're still recovering from it today with COVID-19. There has not been a global pandemic there was not a global pandemic of that level for more than 100 years. But it was there, it was real, it involved policy, it involved resistance to policy, there were political ramifications in it, there were economic ramifications in terms of people either out of work or still working and making money, but they couldn't go anywhere with it. And demands for certain things, supply chain breaking down, inflation going up. This is all things that we're still sorting out here more than 5 years later. So I couldn't do this program without mentioning COVID. There, I said it. Now, just to wrap it up, I think I'm doing pretty well with time here. Good. I just want to reflect upon the last quarter century and the fact that we've all, most of us have lived through that, and how influential it was, how important it was. It's obviously very important, but we go back our 150 years of Mahoning Valley Historical Society, and you look at the previous 5 quarter centuries, all of the Vice and Bits programs since last September. Hands up, all of them. Quite a few. Well, thank you for doing that. I mean, we're celebrating our institutional anniversary, but we're also celebrating our local